racist mob. That's like the label they get put on them, right?
Yeah. And then,
like that was the label that was put on the Proud Boys almost immediately, right?
Yep.
That they're white supremacists, even though there was people of color that were amongst their ranks.
And well, they changed the definition of racist.
Do you know what the whole origin of the Proud Boys is?
I do.
Because
Yes.
it's kind of fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Anthony Cumia told the whole story on this show because it happened with him and Gavin McInnes. That Gavin McInnes came up with it because of a guy that worked there, and they were doing it as a goof.
Yeah.
And then it became a movement, and then it became like anybody can join, and the people that joined, they took it into a radical way, and then it became looking to beat up Antifa, and it's just like, fuck.
Well, Gavin's crossed the line.
Yeah.
That's there's, and I'll point this out for your, you mentioned Media Matters in a recent, bit. You're talking about Alex Jones. I wouldn't use them as a source for anything.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But it was just clips of Alex talking.
That doesn't matter. There's a clip going around of Gavin McInnes where you can hear him saying these crazy things, and you're like, well, he said it.
Right.
But it turns out some of the clips he was talking about dogs. They you really can take the context out of things, and these clips.
I understand that. Yeah.
So what happens if I'm even afraid in my videos I don't quote people anymore because people have taken me reading a quote from a newspaper and attribute it to me simply for reading someone else's quote, and they say, oh, but he said it, right?
Right.
I mean, you look at the really funny instance of Count Dankula, the guy with the Nazi pug.
That is a hilarious story.
And they told him context didn't matter. So when he leaves the courtroom, the reporter says, you said this phrase, which I'm not going to say.
Right.
And he says, so did you. If context doesn't matter,
right.
You should be arrested too.
Yes.
But that's, so what ends up happening is these activist groups, they take these quotes out of context. But admittedly, I think it's fair to point out, a lot of people recognize Gavin. If you can assume they were jokes or not, doesn't matter. He said things that were over the line.
Well,
right?
Gavin's the main problem, the indefensible problem, was the call to violence.
Right.
The calling for violence, and I don't think Gavin's he's another one who's like a prankster. He's like a punk rock style prankster, and he likes to burn it to the ground.
Yep.
And look, I'm a fan of Gavin's interviews on YouTube where he hoodwinks people into sitting down and talking to him, or I don't even know if they're still up anymore. But
my understanding is he ruined some chick's life.
How so?
I mean this somewhat figuratively. She was a left-wing individual. She didn't know who he was. He asked her to come on, and her friends basically just disavowed her immediately
because she was talking to him.
Because she sounded unintelligent.
Oh,
I gotta tell you, man.
Yeah, he cornered her.
I don't know if you have this issue, but for the longest time, it's substantially harder to interview someone on the ideological left than anyone else, right? So I recently reached out to, I regularly reach out to people. I'm not going to name drop because I don't want to drag people. But, man, it takes weeks trying to organize a meeting with some, these personalities who are progressives and on the left. Weeks.
Really?
Yep. Even people who, I've gotten messages from people saying, yeah, man, I watch your stuff all the time, but hold on, let me think about it and talk to some people first. And I'm not saying they're doing it because they're, skittish, or it's just harder. It's a lot harder.
Well, they're probably more cautious, especially if, where your ideology stand is ambiguous. If they're trying to figure it out.
Oh yeah. If you're man, even David Pakman and Jimmy Dore get dragged through this sometimes.
Yeah.
I see people on Twitter calling them alt-right.
That's
weirdly
hilarious.
enough, or intellectual dark web.
Jimmy Dore is an interesting character. I really like that guy.
Yeah,
he's such an interesting guy. He's very smart, but he's an angry lefty, but
but he defends free speech.
Yes,
he defends
that's what I was going to say.
Expression.
Yes,
and
he's 100%.
Here's my thing, man. I was in Berkeley. It was this big protest against Ben Shapiro, and there's a guy wearing a mask with a communist flag, full red gear. So I go up to interview him, and I'm like, "You mind if I interview him?" He's like, "Yeah, of course." And I was like, "Really? Oh, that's surprising." And then we start talking, and I said, "How do you feel about these people who dress in all black and are fighting people and causing problems?" "Oh, that's terrible." And I was like, "You think so? Really?" It's actually, I'm surprised because often when I see people wearing, fully masked up with communist stuff, they're typically in favor of the by any means necessary strategies. And he was like, "No way, man, that's wrong." And so I'm like, you know what, man? I don't care if you're a communist. I don't care if you're whatever, as long as you're not an authoritarian who thinks you have the right to beat other people to instill your ideology on them.
Yeah.
Or use manipulative force or coercion or extortion. So let me talk about why I think what we're seeing with Twitter might be one of the biggest problems ever. Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, these platforms are where we exist socially, politically, It's where our ideas are exchanged. It's where we learn about who we're going to vote for or why we won't vote for somebody. When you ban somebody, you exile them. They're no longer a part of that conversation. So they're very much so told, you are outside the city walls, right? You can't come in, you can't talk to us, and there's nothing you can do about it. But then when you realize the rules are actually bent, they're slanted in a certain direction, you can then predict where things are going.